midwives dissecting life, work, and everything in between. This is Head On View.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Head On View. I'm Carly.
I'm Laura.
I'm Penny.
And today we are talking about breastfeeding, and not just breastfeeding, but extended breastfeeding.
Long-term booby feeding.
Yes. So many of you may or may not know. So the current recommendations by WHO and UNICEF are actually that breastfeeding is recommended to be continued for 2 years and beyond. And I know a lot of people will be saying, well, or not a lot of people, but some people, the haters, will be like, well, you know, these kids can eat. Like, you know, why do they need breast milk? But breast milk actually still provides a lot of nutrition and I have a bit of trouble with this word.
Immunological property. Immunological
protection. Yes.
How much wine have we had already?
Yeah.
One sip.
Yeah, and so it can help with settling, and studies show that it actually can lead to better social adjustment. So a lot of people will be thinking, oh, these babies are so clingy, they're still breastfeeding when they're 3 or 4, but it does show as they get older, they are better socially adjusted, and the longer you breastfeed, the more you decrease your risk of breast cancer.
Which is great. We want that.
Yes. Super.
Penny. We're going to ask you. We're going to get you started. You're going to start talking.
All right, go for it.
What do you think about extended breastfeeding in your job? Do you see a lot of it?
As an MCH, I see a lot of extended breastfeeding. Mostly it's breastfeeding more at night to help breastfeed to sleep. And I think if that's what you've got to do and that's what you want to do, then I see no problem with it. It's an enjoyable bonding experience. Some mums love it.
And do you feel the mums are pretty open about it, or is anyone sort of like doesn't really want to admit to doing that, or do they feel there's like a stigma attached to it?
Yeah, they're pretty open about it actually, because I'm just like, do you breastfeed to sleep? And they're like, yes. And I think a lot of breastfeeding to sleep is a lot of cultural. I've lost my train of thought.
Get back on it.
Come on, Penny.
A lot of different cultures do extended breastfeeding, so they feel no shame in it. They just say, okay, we do it.
So I think you had an experience, Laura, with a mum, like an islander.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when we say islander, we mean Pacific Islands.
Yeah. Yes. So Maori, Samoan, Tongan, people from these areas. Apparently, so this woman, it was her 5th or 6th baby, I can't remember now, but she was saying that they breastfeed their babies, their children, till 6, 7, school age. The kids come back from school, have a breastfeed, and then go out and play. Even as an LC and a midwife, I remember just looking at her like, what? They do what? And I didn't find it shocking, but at the same time, she was more shocked that I looked shocked. She was looking at me. She's like, why does that sound so strange to you?
Yeah, I definitely think in Australian culture, it's not something you would see as common.
Yeah.
Someone's left the phone on. It's not something you would see as common, like 7-year-olds being breastfed. It sort of reminds me of, do you remember there was that show, The Slap?
Oh, yes.
Yes. And then there was the character of the Melissa George character, and then she had her boy who I think was meant to be maybe 5 or 6, and he was still breastfeeding.
Yes.
And I think that sort of...
This particular woman, this mother, said to me, she's like, why do you look so shocked when I say that? I said, we just don't hear that in Australia. If someone is breastfeeding an older child, I think most people's reaction would be, oh, or ew, or that's not right. Or I've heard if the child can talk and walk, they shouldn't be breastfeeding.
Which is crazy because I always feel it crazy because, you know, there's so much goodness in milk. And I think that no one seems to have an issue with drinking milk from a cow.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you're a grown-up and you're drinking milk that's meant for a baby cow. People seem to think that's less weird to drink milk from another species than a baby or a child drinking their own mother's milk.
Yeah. I would say it's more sexualized.
Yeah.
Because breasts are more sexualized in the media as well. So, say for this islander mum, it's a necessity. It's how she parents her children. It's a way for the kids to get comfort and nutrition. It's cultural for them. It's a bonding
It's just a norm.
It's normal.
And then when you've got all these kids seeing that, then to them it's normal as well.
And even during the appointment, and she was breastfeeding her baby, I had to get her to sign something. I was like, oh, I'm really sorry, you're feeding. And the woman, her sister, whoever it was with her, immediately stepped in and held the baby's head and the woman's boob. And it was just such a natural progression to helping a woman, you know, when you parent as a family, they're a tribe. Where here, I don't think women breastfeed in public as much as we like to think they do.
No.
In our country. Or, you know, I've had people when I was breastfeeding look at me. I was breastfeeding my son on a plane once and he was 1. And he was long. He was a big kid, fat baby. And I had people looking at me.
Do you feel sometimes though, I don't know, it's hard, like you think people are looking at you, but you might be thinking they're looking at you for one reason, but they could be looking at you for something else because you've got no idea why they're looking at you. And in your head, you're like, oh, they're judging me for breastfeeding.
Yeah.
But
I felt judged.
You felt judged
anyway because I was coming back from a country and a place where the family I was with were very judgy about me breastfeeding a child over the age of 1. It was like, they won't sleep well. They'll get too attached to you. He'll start asking for it in public, and that will be embarrassing. People will stare. It's disgusting.
That is so...
It's going to become sexual for them. I've had that said to me. And I think it's ridiculous. Like, it's the only way I could get him to sleep. He's now over 13. He's almost 14.
Very well adjusted. As much as a 13-year-old boy can be.
Yeah, he smells a bit. He's well adjusted. He's social. He's happy. He's comfortable. He's comfortable with his body. He's comfortable being around other people in the house and their bodies. Like, if there's no, and I don't know if that's because I breastfed him.
And did you have any of those issues, like I said, like you would have trouble weaning him, have trouble him, you know, letting go? So,
no, I know people do. And it's not to say that if you breastfeed past few years, you won't have those problems. Some children are more attached and it's very difficult to get them to wean. But in my case, I just said, it's your choice. I'm happy to continue. I'm like, happy to keep breastfeeding you. And then one day he just said, I don't want it anymore.
And what about your second child? How long did you breastfeed her for?
She was less. She was about 18 months. And she's always been, as you guys know, quite a demanding, forceful child. And when she's made a decision, and I remember her just pushing me away one day and saying, no more. And that was it.
And that was it. Boom, done.
Boom, done. I remember the day. It was a Wednesday. It was in the morning. She had a breastfeed when she woke up and she said, no more. Don't want any more. And I said, oh, like for the day? And she's like, no, forever.
Wow, that's very vocal for an 18-month-old.
She was very, very, yes, that was her though. Forever.
I think the thing with also extended breastfeeding is that it's quite sensationalized in the media. You get those articles about women who, you know, I breastfeed my 3-year-old, 5-year-old, and then it goes on to Facebook and any types of other news outlets. And
there was that Time this was a few years ago. Do you remember that Time magazine? And they had the lady standing, and then the little boy was like standing on the chair, breastfeeding, kind of like looking,
And there's a lot of, at the moment, there's a lady on Facebook that's very popular, and she actively breastfeeds her 2.5, 3-year-old, and she's pregnant as well, and she gets a lot of stick. She's always saying she gets a lot of backlash from people saying you shouldn't. That's disgusting. I think that's the biggest thing. That's disgusting. The child can ask for it. They shouldn't be doing it.
We also need to point out that it is totally safe. I mean, obviously everyone's individual, but there's no real medical reason why you shouldn't breastfeed whilst you're pregnant. And our bodies are so amazing. So I've spoken to people who, you know, they're breastfeeding like their 2-year-old, they're breastfeeding their newborn, and their boobs, like somehow your body knows like which child is going to which boob. So I know how they know because it's the saliva glands. I'm kind of saying it like it's magic. It's not magic. It's not magic. So I don't know how technical it gets. But basically when your baby is on the nipple, the saliva and the chemicals in the saliva goes up to your brain and tells your body what the baby needs. Yeah. So you'll find, a lot of people find when they are still feeding an older child and a newborn, they'll get their favourite boobs because that's the boob that's making the milk for them.
Yeah, exactly. Also, people forget that when you have a newborn, if you're tandem feeding, which could be like a whole nother podcast, but we might as well talk about it now. Feeding a newborn and feeding a toddler, the toddler is a great person to have around to get rid of mastitis, lumps, bumps, because they're
effective at sucking.
They're effective at sucking. So I've had a friend of mine who's had mastitis recurrently with all her babies, and toddler was feeding, the next toddler was feeding, and each time the toddler managed to drain her breast effectively to make the mastitis go away quicker.
There you go. Look at all the benefits.
So toddlers are great. They've got this great suck reflex. They're really strong. You know, it's beneficial. And at the same time, I've heard toddlers say, like at meetings when I was part of the Breastfeeding Association, say that it tastes nice. Like even my son remembers it. He says he remembers it being warm and sweet.
Did you ever taste your own breast milk?
Yes.
I think everyone has. I think everyone will.
I did.
By itself or in cereal or something?
I had it in
coffee.
I had it in a cup of tea because I had run out of milk. And I was like, I wonder if I can use my own breast milk. I mean, it's milk.
Yeah.
It's milk and it's
your body.
My body fluid.
Yeah.
Like, it's no different than, I don't even know how to compare, swallowing your own spit, right?
Yeah.
So it just made my tea taste funny. Like my tea tasted like metallic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Maybe it mixed in with the tea properties.
Yeah, like the tannins or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but then because after the cup of tea, I was like, I'm not quite sure. I enjoyed that.
Why are we doing that again?
And then I thought, you know what? I'll just, next time I express a little bit, I'll try it and see what I think. And I remember at the time, my husband at the time walked in and he's like, what the fuck are you doing? And I was like, I'm drinking my own breast milk because I want to know what this tastes like. And to me, it tasted sort of like watered down condensed milk. It had the thickness, but it didn't have the sweetness.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing the sweetness is something that the babies taste and not the adults. It didn't really, it wasn't offensive. It just didn't
wasn't for you.
It wasn't, wasn't for me.
Yeah.
But I have tasted it. Yes.
So I remember watching this documentary. It was an English documentary. It was about a lady who she had this excess supply, has so much breast milk. So she used to pump and she would donate like ridiculous amounts to the milk bank. This was in England. And then her husband said, look, there's so much milk. He's like, we never even buy milk. He said, I just use it on my cereal, in my tea.
Oh,
I know. I was like, well, that's crazy. But I mean, well, it's free. Why not? Yeah.
Yeah.
And how healthy they are, actually.
And what about, you know, back in the day when there was wet nurses?
Yes. Right? Yeah.
I mean, they breastfed babies and children.
I don't see an issue with that at all. And I think we've seen examples. Who was it? Salma Hayek, the actress?
Oh, yeah.
And she was somewhere, Africa or somewhere doing like a Red Cross mission, I think.
Okay.
And this must have been a few years ago. And she was currently breastfeeding her own baby. And then there was like all these starving babies, so she breastfed them.
In modern society, if someone else say, your baby's crying, the sister picks up the baby and, the mother's in the shower, I'll breastfeed the baby. So, okay, I don't mind that. But like if it was a complete stranger.
Well, yeah. I actually witnessed this once. So there was two ladies in double room.
Yep.
And they hadn't met before, but obviously they've been in there, they've got newborns, they're chatting. And one of the ladies was having a really hard time breastfeeding and settling her bubby. The other lady, no issues, baby hopped on, boom, done. I think maybe her supply had come in a bit quicker.
Yeah.
And so the one who was having trouble, she was like, help me. So the other mum was breastfeeding for her.
Oh,
and
really?
Yeah. So I remember I was in the room and I was like, and then they told me it was, and they were both very happy with the situation. The mum who couldn't feed was like, oh my God, she was really glad that she'd met this woman. Yes. I mean, that's not something you said. It's like I've seen that once, like the only time I've ever seen that happen.
I've walked in and had a woman breastfeeding the baby and I've said, she looks different. And she's like, oh, I'm her sister. I'm like, but you're breastfeeding the baby. She's like, she's tired. And I'm like, she's not even here. Where is she? And she had gone to the toilet. And she said, this is what we would do. And we question it in our culture, in our Western world. We question it because it's like, oh, what if that person has AIDS, HIV, Hep C, all these things that we would test for if we think, babies have been mixed up or something like that, or a baby gets breastfed by the wrong mother, something like that. So that's what we would do. Oh no, it's terrifying. Milk banks test the milk and test the mothers and like everything like that. But in some cultures, it's just like give the baby
it's
to
your
someone.
family. You trust them. You know their background.
Yeah.
And you see some starving cultures overseas that don't exactly have the nutrients.
Yeah.
Just help support.
Let's look at other countries. I was looking at other countries.
Yeah.
What do other countries do?
Yeah, so in Australia, the latest statistics show that 96% of mothers initiate breastfeeding, which is amazing amount. That's great. But by 6 months, only 15% of people are exclusively breastfeeding. So lots of different reasons for that, whatever, mother's choice, or some people find it too hard, too difficult. And a lot of people don't have the support either. So even, you see the ones who want to breastfeed and it's really hard for them to get the support and help to do it.
A lot of my clients actually go back to work quite early, so around the 4 to 6 months.
Yeah.
And they don't have the baby, and they obviously don't have, expressing rooms at work, or to even still not exclusively breastfeed, but able to express and give the baby EBM in a bottle.
Of course, and that's another thing with paid maternity leave is can people afford to go, you know what, I'm going to stay at home for a year and just hang out with my baby and breastfeed and raise them and look after them. Yeah. And if you can't afford to and you don't have the choice, then there's not really any option. If you're working somewhere and you're like, I can't pump regularly, so I'm going to end up with mastitis. My only option really is
some women just can't pump at all because it's so stressful for them. Yeah. I'm looking at all these different countries. It's really interesting. So India, apparently breastfeeding in public is frowned upon, and only 44% of women are able to breastfeed their infants within an hour after delivery.
An hour after delivery, I feel like we all would have seen that plenty of times here. If people have had cesareans, and unfortunately sometimes it literally comes down to the fact we don't have enough staff. Yeah. So we don't have a staff member who can stay with you while your baby feeds.
Yes. What about Brazil? Let's not talk about that.
India, is India,
that was depressing.
Is India equipped to deal with the complications? Like maybe these babies are ending up in the nursery.
Maybe,
For some reason, in this culture, they'd be able to avoid those problems.
Apparently in Italy, Italian hospitals introduced dummies, formula, and glucose right from birth. I don't know if anyone knows about the La Leche. Is that how it's pronounced? La Leche League?
Yes.
It started in Canada, I believe.
A few of them.
They have a advocacy group in Italy trying to raise awareness. Only 19% of women continue to breastfeed past 4 to 6 months, despite 85% being breastfed at birth. I find this really interesting. That whole slogan, breast is best? I remember when that slogan started and people were up in arms, like, don't make the formula feeding moms feel bad. It's not. It's how you're reacting to it.
It is hard because there is obviously, we all know the benefits of breastfeeding for mum and baby, and you want to encourage it, but then you still have now mother's choice, and for whatever reason they may choose if they want to. And I always, and of course if people want to breastfeed, all behind it, you want to help them do as much as you can. And you want them, even when it's night 2 and they're tired and it's really hard, you don't want to be like, oh, here, have a bottle of formula, because you know that they want to breastfeed. So you don't want to just be like, here, have a bottle of formula. You want to help them.
And the prevalence of cesarean rates we know are really, really high. And whether it's a cold Caesar, as in a planned Caesar, or, an emergency Caesar, that affects breastfeeding rates as well. And once women sort of get in their head that they haven't got enough milk, and there's all these factors that are contributing to them not being able to breastfeed, they're less likely to breastfeed past 6 months, past 12 months, because they found it so hard in the first 3 days. And they've watched, remember our podcast on things in the media, and they've watched, women just put babies on the boob in a movie like it's easy. It's just, this is the best moment of my life. And it's not always. It's a struggle and it's a dance, and you have to learn it between mom and baby. And I think women forget these things, that they're often facing challenges that 50 years ago, maybe they didn't face the same challenges. More women would be pushing out babies. I don't know.
And also if we look at maybe, 50 years ago, it was people would be staying 10 days in your postnatal ward.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people are checking out after 24 hours, 48 hours.
6 hours, boom, gone.
Done. When do you have the time, especially if this is your first baby, when do you have the time for us to help you, teach you about breastfeeding? You go home after 6 hours, you've still got a sleepy newborn who just wants to sleep. They've been born, all they want to do is sleep. One night later, they're like crazy monster.
I just read an interesting thing about Rwanda, which is apparently has one of the highest rates of HIV in the world, but it also has one of the highest breastfeeding rates in the world, with 90% of mothers breastfeeding. But
the thing is, if your option is feed your baby formula made with dirty water or breastfeed, you're safer to breastfeed.
So maybe women in Western cultures, if they stopped and see a 3-year-old or 4-year-old breastfeeding, most people may say, oh, I don't think that's right because they're too old. But maybe we should start changing the way we think and say, wow, that's really amazing that mum was able to get to
breastfeed for that long.
Look at how amazing. Maybe she really struggled the first 3 months and this was a goal for her. We're not lifting each other up when it comes to breastfeeding. We say to women all the time, I say to women all the time, I want you to feed your baby. I want you to be able to parent as well. I want your mental health to be well. And if they find breastfeeding so soul destroying and they can't get through it, then I'm not going to force them to do it.
No, of course. Definitely. Take that bottle.
Yeah. But if a woman says to me, all I want to do is breastfeed, because that's what I was like with my first child. I said, all I want to do is breastfeed. Come hell or high water, I'm not putting a bottle in this baby's mouth because that was my choice. Not anyone else's choice around me. It was my choice. But feeding a 1 or 2-year-old, people stare at you, and the first thing they think is breastfeeding's for the mother. It benefits the mother because it's keeping the mother close to her child, or it's gross.
It does benefit the mother, but it benefits the baby too.
Yeah. I agree with some of these stats here. It'd be interesting to find out if the stats are for the first child only, because do they stop breastfeeding the first child after 6 months, and what happens when they have the second child? Because they're aware of what happened with the first child. Do the rates actually increase?
Also, they have less time now. They've got 2 babies.
True.
I also agree that it also comes down to a little bit of lack of education, because 50 years ago, no one knew anything about tongue ties. They didn't know anything about lactation consultants either. And people just put children on the breast because that's the way to feed your baby. There was no such thing as formula. And if women knew about all these long-term issues, benefits, long-term benefits, everyone touched this one, long-term benefits, and they might actually do continue.
And how many undiagnosed tongue ties do we think are leaving the hospital and that are causing problems with breastfeeding?
From my experience, a lot. Because I don't want to make the tongue tie, but to properly assess the tongue tie, you actually need to put your finger in the baby's mouth, not just look at the tongue and go, it doesn't look like a tongue tie.
That looks like a tongue tie.
Do you feel, so when you are doing your visits, is it part of the normal assessment to assess for a tongue tie, or is it something you do if the mother's saying she's having problems breastfeeding?
Not part of the physical check is to have a look at the face and how the tongue moves, but if they do say, it's hurting, or there's something going on like a little light flash, you go, okay, have been assessed. And they go, they looked in the hospital and said it was fine, but did they actually feel the tongue? And I work next door, luckily, to a lactation consultant who always just comes in and goes, yes, this is a tie. You need to do something about this. Because most people say, can the baby sort of lift their tongue up, but can they lift their tongue over the gums and
can they push it forward?
Yeah.
My son had a tongue tie. I never did anything about it.
So I think with Sam, it's no issues at all. And
I could see that he had it.
And there's different types of tongue tie as well. There's not just your regular
anterior,
can't poke your tongue out. There's the lots of fancy names.
Anterior, lip tie, cheek tie.
Yeah, there's all these.
I think people can have tongue ties and not affect feeding, but
and I will say, as a midwife myself, we received very little education about it. Like very little education about this is what a tongue tie looks like, this is how you assess it.
You can tell when you're looking after a woman who's been breastfeeding a toddler. I can always tell because of how they hold the baby. And every time I see a a woman with the baby in this position where the body's like falling down their lap and the baby's like grappling at the boob. They're like half holding the head out. And I say to them, did you feed your first child for over a year? Oh, yes, I'm still feeding the 3-year-old. Oh, okay. Like, well, this is a baby, not a toddler. You can always tell.
Do you remember that client we had that night? On night she got massaged because she was feeding her toddler and her baby, and only from the one breast.
Oh, really?
Why was she not feeding off the other breast?
Yeah.
I can't actually remember, but all I know is we got called in at like 4 o'clock in the morning in the middle of a crazy busy shift, and one breast was literally blown up the size of a watermelon.
I don't remember that. Must have been tired. It was at 4 a.m. That's when I hit the wall.
Yes. And we're there trying to help the crying baby and express her. And
Wouldn't it be nice if we allowed toddlers who were still breastfeeding to stay in hospital?
Like a family room or something. You say like dad and baby and...
I'd like a room at our hospital, any hospital, that's like a communal breastfeeding room where women can go and sit around and chat. And then I think it probably wouldn't work because some of our women don't speak English. Or
It's hard. So I have seen rooms like that in private hospitals that I've worked in. They have breastfeeding rooms and there's a lactation consultant on staff who is on staff all day in a breastfeeding room, and the ladies can go into the breastfeeding room and they all sit, there's like big comfy chairs, so there's no curtains, there's nothing dividing them. So if the lactation consultant is over there giving advice to Molly or someone, Jenny's sitting next door, she can see exactly what advice she's getting and what she's doing.
So good.
And
do they utilize it?
So, yeah.
They do.
I found people utilize it, and I would always say it was part of the general education. So you would say, this is the breastfeeding room, this is when it's open, and there was signs up in all the rooms saying when it was, and then they would also have a physio. A physio would come in, so twice, there would be scheduled time, the physio would come into the breastfeeding room because you've got this audience, this ready-made audience, and then she would do a little talk about general sort of postnatal physio health. So then your people are getting physio advice, and also they're getting breastfeeding advice, and they're in this sort of community.
Well, I think
public hospital.
we tried to initiate it, but people just couldn't come because it was scheduled. Like
we did.
9
We
o'clock
tried.
in the morning,
We tried like
ridiculous.
Was it for physio?
It was physio, and I don't know if it was breastfeeding as well, but I think it was physio and something.
When you've got a room that's open from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and only closed for an hour for lunch, like between 1 and 2, then you've essentially got all day that these women can come, and then
They've got the fun.
Yeah, they've got the funding and they have the flexibility. So it wasn't even always a set time. Like if there was a lot of people in there, the physio could come back in. And then, they had the money that as well, a physio, she would come around, and it wasn't, you didn't have to put in a referral. This physio would come and see every single woman post-birth.
I wonder if there's higher rates of breastfeeding or continued breastfeeding. Women
From
who
private?
have private
Who have had extended
who have
stays.
babies in the public system.
That'd be
5 days.
interesting. I'm sure someone has done a study there,
sure
but I
they
do
have.
not have the figures for that study.
We can probably look that up.
We'll back on that later.
Yeah, let me have a look and see if there's anything else interesting in other countries.
Let me see if I can quickly find that.
Don't you love how organised we are on this podcast? Doing the research as the plot is happening.
It's got a new tangent though.
Yeah.
But that's the beauty of the podcast.
Yeah. Our tangents, but it's all
It's all
linked.
interconnected.
all linked.
Everything is connected.
Because the moment you birth a baby, however you birth the baby, the moment the baby goes onto your chest, onto your breast, is the beginning of breastfeeding. Whether you breastfeed for a month, 6 years, 7 years, 3 years, it doesn't matter. Women in our society nowadays need to be sort of lifted up and told that's okay to have an extended goal. If you want to breastfeed your child, I've had women say to me, well, I breastfed all my children for 3 years. This one's not going to be any different. And that's her goal. And I think we should support.
Definitely. At the end of the day, everyone has to do what is right for them and what is right for their baby, because it's never just because something's right for Joan over there doesn't mean it's right for you. So you have to work out what's right for you, what's right for your baby, and just go with it and ignore the haters. Like they're not there at 2 a.m. when your baby's screaming.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
So according to a study done in 2017 by the
look at-
Australian Breastfeeding Association,
Oh, yes.
in breastfeeding in hospital, breastfeeding initiation, baby's put to the breast or attempted to express at least once, 94.8% in public hospitals, but only slightly higher, 96.7% in private. Final feed before discharge exclusive and directly from the breast, no complementary express milk, was 79% in public hospitals, which is actually higher
than the private. It's so hard, isn't it? Because private has all this support, but they also have the night nursery. So the night nursery was open between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. And I found this across the board at multiple private hospitals that I've worked in, and it was utilised by a high percentage. This is just in my experience, a high percentage of mums.
Interesting.
So, yeah.
If a baby's in the night nursery, they're getting alternative milk other than breast milk.
Some mums had EBM and others were happy for their baby to have a bottle overnight.
Okay.
So essentially, if the doctors are promoting it, then the women are more likely to do it. Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Any final thoughts on the topic?
Just be fucking kind to each other.
And yourself.
And women.
And yourself. Be kind to yourself too.
If you see a woman at the park breastfeeding her 3-year-old and the first thought that comes to your head is, ew, stop and go.
Don't judge.
Don't judge. It's none of your fucking business. Move along. Go keep pushing your kid on the swing. It has really nothing to do with you. Or maybe engage in conversation with her and chat to her, baby, child on the breast. So, lift each other up.
Maybe she wanted to do it, but she was too scared to, and now she's just finding another way. And instead of going up and actually talking to this woman and finding out more about it, then she might be more confident to do it in the future. Don't bag it out, because parents have got to do what they've got to do to get their children to sleep. So
that's right.
They do.
They do. That's how I got
when you're running your husband has to work and get up at 6 a.m. and you've got to take the kids to school and you've got to get
I would have died without breastfeeding.
2-year-old Sammy to sleep. Do what you got to do.
Okay. We hope you have enjoyed another episode of Head on View. So as usual, follow us on Insta, Head on View Podcast. Like us, subscribe, download, all that jazz. If there's any topics you want us to cover or any questions you want to ask, DM us and we will get to them. We will see you next time. Bye,
And be sure to tune in next time for more laughs, thrills, and real stories from real midwives on Head on View.
I didn't know it was still recording.